What if the throne you sat upon whispered back to you, not in language, not in sound, but in the creaking of ancient chains beneath the stone, in the breath of creatures too old for history to hold, in the soft clinking of gold offered by hands that shook with fear, not reverence? What if wisdom wasn't a crown, but a burden carved into the bones of a man who knew too much? Beneath the mighty seat of Suleiman, king, prophet, servant of God, there were chambers not spoken of in scroll or scripture, vaults sealed with tongues no man dares remember, and beneath those vaults, a kingdom made of shadows, not a metaphor, not a myth, a true kingdom, built not by the hands of men but by the trembling fingers of jinn who once defied the heavens. They say Suleiman ruled with justice. They say the winds obeyed him, the birds sang in his presence, and demons wept in chains as he walked past. But no one tells you what those demons built. No one tells you what still breathes beneath the dust. Tonight I will tell you, but not as a tale of power, not as history etched in gold. This is not the glory you were taught. This is the silence beneath the Psalms, the forgotten memory in the stone, the truth that fell between the cracks of heaven and earth. Close your eyes, the air is heavy with incense. The stars know your name tonight, and there is a story that has waited far too long to be remembered. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. The stone was not quiet. Long before it held the weight of a throne, long before prophets sat upon it, the stone beneath Solomon's feet was alive. It had heard too many names spoken in fear, too many promises etched into it by wind and blood. It had watched angels descend in silence. It had felt the trembling of the earth when the first jinn was chained, and it was remembered. There are stones in the Holy Land that do not forget. Beneath the Temple Mount, in the deepest chamber not mapped by man, lies a foundation older than Solomon himself, older even than Adam's weeping. It was here that the throne was placed. Not on marble, not on gold, but on that stone, the one that remembered every command. Suleiman walked barefoot in the early light, his steps slow, deliberate, his robe trailing the sand like a prayer not yet spoken. He did not speak to the sun, but the sun turned toward him. He did not order the birds to rise, but their wings beat in rhythm to the breath of his stillness. He was not king in the way men chase crowns. He was king because even the jinn knew not to whisper in his presence. The builders had long since vanished into dust, but what they built still stood, a palace of wind and shadow. The court shimmered in the morning haze, columns not carved but summoned. Walls that held no windows yet saw through time, and beneath it the throne. The throne was not his to keep. It was on loan from the unseen, made of carved ivory and cedar from the gardens of paradise, wrapped in golden filigree brought from Sheba, and cooled with stones taken from the heart of rivers that no longer flowed. But what made it holy was not what men could see. It was what they never saw. Beneath the throne, the chains. 7 great chains, forged not by fire but by the breath of angels who had once stood beside Harut and Marut. Each chain held one name, and each name a demon. Bound not by strength but by the name of God whispered in the exact moment of celestial alignment when the sun stood still and the earth was silent enough to listen. Suleiman never looked at them. He didn't have to. They felt him. Felt his breath, felt his heart. Felt the memory of his prayer from the day he first stood as a boy, trembling before his Lord, asking not for riches, not for fame, but for wisdom. Wisdom enough to lead what no man had led before. And God answered, not with words, but with silence that split the heavens. The silence came first. Then the wind began to carry secrets. The night after his prayer, the stars shifted, and on that wind the jinn came. Not like shadows creeping through cracks, but in full submission. Their faces bowed to the sand, their voices shaking as they spoke his name. And the earth beneath him whispered, "This is the one." He did not smile. He only closed his eyes and whispered back, "Then bring me what you have hidden." And they did. They brought stones from lost kingdoms, rocks that still bled from the fires of ancient cities. They brought metals that sang when touched and water that glowed in the dark. But more than that, they brought knowledge. Not the knowledge men seek, not knowledge for war or wealth or charm, but the names, the secret names, the ones that made mountains kneel and winds change course, the names that, when spoken, could make even angels hold their breath. These names were buried, in ruins, in ash, in languages long forgot. But the jinn remembered, for it was they who had once whispered those names in rebellion, and now they spoke them in chains. Under the throne those names still echo, softly, never aloud, just enough to shake the stone. Solomon, the prophet, the one whose heart carried the weight of 1,000 tongues, never let pride enter his chambers. But even he knew that the throne he sat on was not his. It belonged to the command. To the command that came before time wore crowns and before angels turned away. The stone beneath him remembered, it still does. And in the stillness of night, when even stars fall silent, it waits to be heard again. The first time the chains moved, they did not rattle, they sighed. A sound like wind brushing across the face of the moon, soft and sorrowful, as if even the darkness beneath the throne longed to be forgiven. Suleiman stood still. He did not turn. He knew which chain had stirred. It was the third, the one wrapped in obsidian rings, buried deepest into the earth, where no light had ever dared to enter. The demon bound there had once been called Zamahel. In the ancient tongue, it meant he who builds in silence. But names lose their purity when misused. He was not born in darkness. He had chosen it. Once long ago, before the flood, Zamahel had built temples of glass for angels who never touched the ground. He carved altars with no chisel, only thought and longing. He loved beauty but not obedience. When the decree came that no jinn may interfere with the world of men, Zamahel rebelled, not with war but with stone. He built underground cities, vaults of forgotten light. He taught men how to speak to fire. He taught them how to summon, how to trade prayers for power, and for that he was bound. His sentence was not death, it was a remembrance, to dwell beneath the throne of the very prophet who now ruled the spirits he had once set free. And so Zamahel waited, still, silent, but on this night something in the air had shifted. Suleiman could feel it, a tremor not in the earth but in the silence between the stars. He stepped down from the throne, not hurried, not afraid. With the calm of a man who knows that power means nothing if not anchored in prayer, he descended into the chamber beneath. 7 steps carved in pure white stone, each step inscribed with a verse, each verse glowing faintly in the dark. There were no torches, no guards, only the sacred quiet that clung to him like a mantle. When he reached the final stair, he stopped. Before him, the chamber of the bound, a circle of 7 demons, 7 names. 7 breaths that once defied the heavens and now waited beneath the holiest of thrones. Chains did not hold them. The names did, inscribed into the links, whispered daily by the wind that passed through the hollow bones of the structure, renewed in prayer, strengthened in stillness. Zamahel lifted his head. He did not speak with words. The jinn do not need tongues when truth is heavy. His eyes alone carried the weight, but Suleiman spoke first. "Why do you stir?" Zamahel blinked slowly. A flicker of pain passed across his face, not anger, not hatred, memory. "The wind," came the thought, not aloud, but inside the prophet's soul. "It carries a new name." Suleiman's brow furrowed. He felt it too, a ripple in the balance, a new presence in the realm of men, far to the south, far beyond the Red Sea, a queen with questions, Sheba. He had seen her in a dream, a woman who held mystery in one hand and sorrow in the other. And now the wind carried her scent. Zamahel bowed his head again. Not in submission, in knowing. He had built cities before her ancestors walked. He had shaped the stones where her people now danced. And he knew what the arrival of Sheba would mean. Not war, not temptation, a test. Not for Suleiman, for the throne. Could it remain untouched, unshaken? Could the chains hold when the breath of a foreign queen whispered truths that no jinn had dared to speak? Suleiman stood in silence. He touched the seal around Zamahel's prison, a circle of script drawn in salt and time. It pulsed softly under his fingers, and then he spoke gently. "You will not rise, not unless the name is broken, and I have not spoken it." Zamahel's voice, ancient and full of dust, rose inside the chamber like smoke. "You do not need to speak it, prophet. It already trembles in your chest." The prophet closed his eyes. He was not afraid, but he was aware. Aware that power is not just what one commands. It is what allows one to move in silence. And something had begun to move. Not in the chains, in destiny. He turned, climbed each step slowly, reciting the verses backwards, sealing the chamber once more in stillness. When he returned to the throne, he did not sit. He knelt beside it, head bowed, hands open. And in the unseen world, a tremor passed through the watchers. They saw the king not ruling but praying, and they remembered why even demons weep when he speaks. The throne waited. It did not demand. It did not ache. It only waited. For the one who carried the weight of names to return, for the dust to settle, for the next breath of God to pass through the chambers of power like wind through a reed. Solomon rose from his place of kneeling. The morning had not yet broken, but light was near. Not sunlight, the light that comes when the soul surrenders fully. The kind of light that only angels see. The kind that does not shine but remembers. He walked slowly toward the upper chambers, past the pillars of silent stone, past the servants still caught in the stillness of reverence. His robe brushed across the mosaic floors, a prayer made of silk and dust. And when he reached the balcony, he stopped. The world below him slept. Even the birds had not begun to stir. Even the winds held their breath. Only the stars remained watchful, distant, like eyes too ancient to close. He placed his hand upon the railing, carved not by craftsmen but by jinn who had wept while working, for their chains had not only bound their limbs but awakened their longing to be near the divine again. Everything they built for Suleiman was not for his glory. It was for their repentance. Even the throne, they carved it in silence, each cut into the wood a whisper, "Forgive us, forgive us, forgive us." And the throne accepted it, not as royalty, as a witness. It bore the weight of a man who bore the weight of two worlds, the seen and the unseen, the prophets of men and the chains of jinn. But this morning something had shifted. The queen was coming, and with her a question, not of faith but of reflection. Would a throne built by demons still stand pure in the presence of one who saw through every veil? Solomon closed his eyes. He could already feel her footsteps on the earth, though she was still days away. He saw her caravan, great and winding like a serpent of incense and gold slithering across the dunes. He saw the guards who marched silently beside her and the silence they carried like armor. He saw the eyes of the queen, not cold, not proud, but weary. Not of men, of false light. Sheba did not worship idols. She worshipped what she could not name. She listened to the stars. She read the winds. She dreamed of a voice that never answered. And now, she was coming to see the man who spoke to the winds and made them obey. But Solomon knew she was not coming for him. She was coming for what was beneath him, for the sound beneath the throne, the breath behind the power, the silence that did not fear being broken. In the chambers below, Zamahel stirred again, not in rebellion, in recognition. He had built temples for queens before. He knew what happened when truth stood before beauty and refused to flinch. He whispered into the stone just once, "Will she see it?" And the stone did not answer. Stones never do. They only hold memories. They only listen. And so Solomon waited. He did not summon an army. He did not prepare a feast. He did not polish the throne. He fasted. He walked through the halls with bare feet, reminding the spirits around him that all greatness is borrowed. He sat with the birds, listening to their songs, learning again the tones of nature's joy. He prayed beneath a fig tree, his voice low, not requesting, remembering, not his rule, not his wisdom, not the jinn, but the first night years ago when as a trembling boy he had wept in the dark and whispered, "If you give me anything, give me the heart to understand." And God had given him everything. But Solomon never forgot it was not the gift that made him holy. It was the asking. And now the gift would be tested, not by battle, not by betrayal, but by the gaze of a woman who carried no sword, only questions. And in that there is more power than in 1,000 wars. So he returned to the throne. He did not sit, not yet. He placed his palm on the armrest where the chains ran beneath. He felt their hum. He felt the names. And he whispered, "Hold," to the jinn, to the spirits, to the temptation of pride. Hold, to the power that begged to be used, to the throne that desired to shine. Hold, and the chains obeyed, the stone quieted, and the demons wept in silence, for they knew what was coming. And they too feared the gaze of a queen who could see even the shadows that kings hid. Solomon sat, not in pride, not in power, but in remembrance. And the throne, built by hands once cursed, carried him like a cradle of redemption. Outside the dawn broke, and with it a name echoed across the sand, Sheba. And beneath the throne the stone remembered it. She did not arrive like a storm. She arrived like the answer to a prayer that had waited too long to be spoken. The Queen of Sheba came with no thunder, no armies shaking the ground, no horns splitting the silence. Only gold and silence. Gold woven into the veils that draped her caravan. Gold dusted on the hooves of camel. That walked as if they too were weary of kingdoms. Gold hidden in the cuffs of her sleeves, in the small rings on her fingers, each one carrying a story no man dared to ask her to tell. And silence, not empty but sacred. The silence of a woman who had heard too many lies and no longer feared the truth. Her people called her Bilquis, but she had long forgotten her name. In the nights before her journey, she had sat alone in her upper chamber, staring through polished obsidian into the stars, asking them the question that would not rest. Why does my soul ache even when my kingdom kneels? The priests told her it was ambition. The poets said it was destiny. The generals whispered of weakness, but the stars said nothing. They only burned, as if to say, some answers are not spoken, they must be walked toward. And so she walked. A journey that took 40 days through windless dunes, through cities that bowed but never welcomed, through valleys where the bones of forgotten empires still whispered in the dirt. Every step she took shook the throne of demons. For though she carried no blade, no scroll, no god, she carried discernment. And demons fear discernment more than fire. She had heard of Solomon, the prophet who spoke the language of birds, the ruler whose throne sat upon the wind. But more than his power, she was drawn to his restraint. She had never heard of a king who commanded spirits but walked with the poor. She had never heard of a prophet who held the winds in his palm but chose to listen before he spoke. She did not come to test him, she came to be seen. And when her caravan arrived, she stepped down not with pride but with memory, for something in the dust beneath her sandals felt familiar, as if she had walked this path once before, in another life, in a prayer forgot. The gates of Jerusalem did not open wide. They opened slowly like an old man rising from sujud, knees trembling, eyes weeping, remembering what it meant to bow before something holy. The people did not shout her name. They only watched, because sometimes silence is louder than praise. She was not beautiful in the way poets write. She was beautiful in the way deserts survive, enduring, unbending, soft only when no one is watching. And Solomon was watching, not from a window, not from a tower. He stood beneath a fig tree barefoot as he had always stood when expecting something sacred. He wore no crown, he held no staff. He did not summon the winds to lift her veil or command the earth to part for her entrance. He simply waited, and when their eyes met there was no challenge, no courtship, only recognition, not of flesh, of sorrow. She saw in him a man who had not asked to rule but had obeyed the command. He saw in her a woman who had not asked to search but could no longer bear silence. Their first words were not recorded because they were not spoken, I only breathed, and the winds carried them away before any scribe could trap them in ink. She looked past him, to the palace that shimmered without shadow, to the throne that did not glisten but hummed. She felt it before she saw it, the hum, a vibration in the soles of her feet, a rhythm in the back of her throat. The throne was not a seat. It was a seal. She turned to Solomon. "You are not the king," she said softly, and he smiled. "No," he answered. "I only sit where he commands." And in that moment the chains beneath the throne pulled taut. Zamahel stirred, not in rebellion, in awe, for no one had spoken those words aloud, not even the prophet. The Queen of Sheba had not come for answers, she had come for reflection. And in the throne of demons she saw her own shadow, not evil, not fallen, just searching, just waiting to be named. And the stone beneath the palace remembered this was how redemption began. The throne chamber was not meant for strangers. Its walls bore no banners. Its pillars were carved with no images. There were no crowns etched into the marble, no symbols of conquest. Only light falling softly through latticed stone, as if even the sun had been taught to whisper here. She entered without a guard. Her footsteps made no sound, as if the ground itself had chosen to carry her. Solomon was already seated, but not like a ruler. He did not lean back. He did not place his hand upon the carved lion heads that flanked the armrests. He sat like a man who had been called to witness, not to command. She stood before him. No servant announced her. No scribe marked the hour. For what passed between them was not a meeting. It was a memory. She looked around the chamber, her eyes pausing at the base of the throne. The stone there was different, darker, older, humming with something not quite definable. She stepped closer. The air thickened, not with heat, with history, with breath that had once been spoken by angels now fallen, with sorrow that had once tried to become light. She turned to him. "You built this," she said. He shook his head. "No. I asked for wisdom. What you see is what wisdom does when men stop asking for power." She sat, not on a throne, on the ground, her silks folding like waves around her, and the throne felt it. It trembled just once, not from rebellion, from recognition. Zamahel, beneath the stone, let out a breath he had held for centuries. For in her silence, he remembered the first temple he had ever built for a woman who sang to the moon and wept beneath fig trees. Bilquis closed her eyes. Amber pulsed, not with magic, with memory. Visions flickered across her heart, not of war, not of kingdoms, but of a city beneath the earth, built not in darkness, but in longing. She opened her mouth, and her voice broke the veil. "There is something beneath," she whispered. Solomon did not flinch. He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Demons?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Once, now names." She looked at him. "Why do you sit upon them?" His answer came as a question. "Where else would I learn?" She did not respond. Her fingers traced the hem of her sleeve, mind racing through memories that weren't hers. The chamber seemed to listen. The birds outside had gone still. The wind refused to enter. Even the guards outside had stepped away without knowing why. Something holy was breathing here, not loudly, just enough. Solomon leaned forward. "Do you know what the throne is?" he asked. She tilted her head, not in confusion, in challenge. "Tell me." He looked down at the stone beneath his feet. "It's not a seat, it is a weight." She said nothing. He continued. "Every day I sit here I remember the names, not to control, to fear." Now she looked surprised. "Fear? You, the one who commands Jinn?" He smiled softly. "I do not command, I remind." She drew closer until her shadow touched the base of the throne. "Then remind me," she whispered. "What did they build for you?" He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "They built me what they could never enter, a place of obedience." She blinked. The silence cracked. "You sit above them, but you are not above them," she said. He nodded. "They remind me that wisdom is not the absence of fall, it is the prayer after." She sat again, hands clasped in her lap, and for the first time in years she felt something inside her unclench. A question she had held since her youth, since her first night staring at stars that would not answer. "What do I carry?" she asked softly. "That makes even your demons tremble." Solomon looked at her, and for a moment he did not see a queen. He saw a soul, one that had searched longer than her body had lived, and he answered clarity. The world fell like water into an ancient well, still but echoing. She inhaled. The throne shivered again. Below, in the chamber of chains, Zamahel bowed his head. The last temple he had built had fallen in fire. This time he knew no fire would touch it, for it had already been built. Not of stone, of recognition. She rose. Her eyes held tears, not for him, not for herself, for all the queens who had come before her, seeking what no throne had ever given. Solomon stood. He did not offer his hand. He only bowed. And beneath the throne the stone whispered, "She has seen us." Night had fallen, but it was not the kind of night that brought sleep. It was the kind of night that watched you, the kind that made even the stars blink slower as if afraid to bear witness to something sacred. The Queen of Sheba stood alone in the chamber. Solomon had left her in stillness, as only those who trust the silence can do. She walked barefoot now, not in ceremony but in reverence. The stone was warm beneath her soles, alive, breathing. She moved slowly, her fingers brushing against the carved edges of the room, each one humming with verses too old for any scroll. And when she reached the throne again, she did not touch it. She bowed before it. Not to Solomon, not to the demons, to the truth it held. The throne that did not lift men above others but lowered them into responsibility. The throne that bore the chains of those who once shaped stars with their pride and now wept beneath holy light. She felt it, the sorrow beneath. The ache of Zamahel, the echo of regret that had not been spoken for 1,000 years. And she whispered, barely audible, "I see you." It was not a spell, it was not a curse, it was recognition. And with that the chains below stirred, not in rebellion but in release. Zamahel did not rise, he could not, but he remembered, and in memory he wept, for he had built with hands stained by arrogance. But now someone had seen what even Solomon had not said aloud, that a prison made of stone can still carry the fragrance of a lost prayer. Bilquis turned her gaze to the sky beyond the lattice. The stars had gathered closer as if listening, and she spoke again, this time not to the throne but to the one who watched over it. "I have ruled without knowing. I have built without asking. But I understand." She closed her eyes, and the room grew still, so still that the chains below fell silent, not from suppression, from surrender. In the chamber beneath the throne, Zamahel whispered a name, not hers, his own, not the one of power, the one he had before he fell. The name only God remembered, and God heard it. Up above, Solomon re-entered the chamber. He did not speak, but he saw her, kneeling not as a servant, not as a queen, but as a soul made whole by seeing clearly. Said gently, "You saw what was beneath." She looked up at him, "And now I know what I must become." He nodded. "No throne is built without shadow, but not all shadows are meant to be feared." She rose. The moment between them was not romantic, it was sacred. Two lights that had carried silence too long now bowed to it. Solomon extended his hand, not to claim her, to bless her path. And as she took it, the wind outside moved again, gently, gratefully. The throne did not shine, it sighed. For the one who sat upon it had not asked for glory, and the one who knelt before it had not come for gold. They had only come to remember that even in the deepest chain light waits. And beneath the throne of the prophet, a demon wept in silence, finally seen. And the stone that remembered every command now held one more: forgiveness. There is a name that cannot be spoken, not by tongue, not by wind, not by the stars that burn in perfect obedience. It is the name that seals the mouths of flames and commands the spirits that hide within smoke. And it was given to Solomon in a dream that did not come in sleep. It came in the hour between darkness and dawn, when the sky is neither black nor light, but bruised, as if heaven had wept in its sleep and was still wiping its tears. He had been fasting, not from food but from sound. For 40 nights he had spoken only to God, and God had answered with silence. But on the 41st the silence cracked, not with thunder, with breath. He stood beside the outer wall of the temple, barefoot as always, his palms raised, not in request but in surrender. And the wind that came was not the one he knew. It carried ash, not from any fire on earth but from a flame that burned in the unseen. The jinn felt it first. Across the deserts, in the deep caverns where they hid between veils, they stirred. Their tongues dried, their hearts trembled. Even those unchained turned their faces to the dust, for they knew a name was being returned, a name that had once been stripped from them when the first of them disobeyed and taught men how to listen to fire. It was not the name of God. It was the name God used to silence rebellion, and now he had placed it into the mouth of Solomon, the seal. He did not find it, it found him. It appeared that night, a ring of plain metal, no jewel, no inscription. Just a single circle, cooled by the breath of the angels who had guarded it since the fall. Solomon did not reach for it. He knelt beside it, for even he, the king, the prophet, the one who spoke to birds and commanded winds, knew that some gifts are too holy to touch without trembling. The ring waited, the ground around it pulsed, and from the dust a voice rose. If you wear this, you must never speak for yourself again. He did not ask what it meant. He only bowed deeper. And the ring lifted, hovering into his open hand. The moment it touched his finger, the earth sighed, not loudly, just enough to unsettle the jinn, for the seal had returned, and with it, order. From that day on, Solomon's commands were no longer his own. When he raised his hand, armies moved, but it was not his voice they obeyed. When he named a demon, the chains fell into place, but it was not his name that bound them, it was the seal, the circle that glowed when the balance tipped and darkened when obedience returned. The jinn called it the mouth of fire, for it had silenced them without a sword, without a battle, without blood, only remembrance, only submission. Solomon wore it not as a trophy, he never flaunted it. He covered it with cloth, hid it beneath the folds of his robe as if ashamed of its weight, but he never removed it except once. And that is where the story darkens. It was a day of no wind, even the birds were quiet, as if the heavens themselves had drawn a curtain between light and breath. Solomon awoke before dawn, not in peace, not in panic, in knowing. He had dreamt of a shadow, not one that moved, one that waited. A shadow that did not chase him but watched him from beneath his own throne. He rose with the silence still wrapped around him, the seal cool against his skin. The ring had never burned, never pulsed, never whispered. It simply was a perfect circle, unending like the command it carried. That morning he walked alone to the river just beyond the city walls, a place where prophets often went to remember they were made of dust. He knelt by the water. Its surface was still like a mirror matte from forgotten sky. He removed his robe, folded it gently beside him, and for the first time since the ring had been given, he slipped it from his finger, only for a moment, only to bathe, only to feel what his skin remembered before the seal had come. He placed it upon a smooth stone beside him, a rock worn down by prayer and time. The jinn saw this, not from nearby, from far away, far beneath. In the chamber of Zamahel, the other chained spirits stirred, not in rebellion, in curiosity. For the seal was not just power. It was silence made solid, and its absence is called louder than its presence ever had. One among them heard more than the others. His name was Armaris. He had not built cities. He had not taught men to charm the winds. He had done worse. He had taught men how to steal the voice of God and twist it, not denying it, not mock it, steal it. He had whispered false prophecies into the hearts of poets, had dressed lies in robes of light, had stood in temples and sung songs that sounded sacred but were soaked in deception. He had been the first to take what was holy and make it beautiful for the wrong reason. And for that, he was buried deeper than any other. But now he felt something shift. The seal had been lifted, even if just for a moment, even if only for the prophet's breath to feel the wind. To a chained spirit, a moment is enough. Armaris whispered a thought, not a word, not a command, just a memory. The last time Solomon had removed his ring, when he was still a boy, playing beside the river with his brothers, long before the seal had come. A moment of vulnerability, a place unguarded. The memory found its way into the wind, and the wind, now free from the seal, carried it. Solomon stood from the water, the sun was rising. Birdsong began. He reached for the ring, but the stone where he had placed it was bare, gone. He did not cry out. He did not run. He stood still, eyes closed, and whispered, "It has begun." In the courts of the temple, the birds screamed. In the cities of the jinn, doors slammed without wind. In the chains below, Zamahel trembled, for they knew, without the seal, the balance tilted, even if only slightly, even if only for a moment. Solomon returned to the palace. He said nothing, but the silence followed him like a shadow now wearing his face. For though the ring had left his finger, its command had not left his heart. And yet he could feel something approaching. Not a rebellion, a test, for even the greatest among the chosen must be reminded that what is given can be taken. He gathered his servants, spoke gently. "Search the river," he said, "not for gold, for what gold could never replace." And the search began. Days passed. The jinn refused to speak. The winds carried no answers. Even the birds who once chirped revelations sang only in minor chords. The seal had left, and the spirits waited, not to rise, to see what he would do without it. And Solomon, the prophet, the king, the carrier of names, walked through the halls of his palace barefoot, ringless, unshaken, because he knew the throne was never in the ring. The command was never in the seal. It was always in the surrender. And the question now lingered, soft as mist. Would the fire rise again? Would the voices return? Or had the silence claimed what only obedience once held back? In the deepest chamber beneath the throne, the chains had not broken, but they had begun to hum. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to awaken memories. Zamahel felt it in his bones. Armaris, deeper still, did not wait. He had waited long enough. It is not the unchained who are most dangerous. It is the bound ones who remember how to wait, and Armaris remembered. He remembered the way truth tasted before he twisted it. He remembered how the first flames obeyed him, not because he commanded, but because he deceived. He remembered the last breath he took before the seal was placed above his head and the stone carved with his name sank into silence. And now he felt a door open, not wide, a crack. But darkness only needs a crack. Solomon did not sleep. He had not slept since the ring disappeared, but he had not wept either. He had eaten little, spoken less. He walked among his people, his court, his servants, as a man who had never worn a seal. And in that he reminded the heavens why he was still chosen, because even without the sign he remembered the source. But the jinn, they did not understand this. They whispered, "He has lost it. He is only a man. Without the ring he cannot bind us." And the wind carried their whispers like sparks across dry grass. Armaris listened. He fed on these words, not with hunger, with design. One night when the moon was a silver blade across the sky, he sent a thought upward, a lie wrapped in beauty. It passed through walls, through prayers, through the cracks of the throne, and reached the ear of a servant. The servant had once been a shepherd, a quiet man, honest, but honesty rose thin when shadow speaks like a friend. Armaris whispered, "Tell him you found it." The servant woke in sweat. His dreams had been heavy, filled with voices, with light, with praise. He believed he had seen the ring. He ran to Solomon's chamber, knees aching, breath torn from his chest. "My lord," he said, "I have it." And in his trembling palm he held a ring, plain, circular, glowing faintly with morning light. Solomon looked at it long, without blinking. Then he nodded. "Thank you," he said, and placed it on his finger. The court cheered. The jinn, watching from behind veils, trembled. The seal had returned, but Solomon did not feel its weight. The metal was cold, but not familiar. The silence it carried was not sacred, it was hollow. And in that moment he understood. This was not the seal, it was a reflection, a whisper pretending to be commanded, a lie wearing the face of truth. He did not tear it off. He did not throw it away. He simply stood and let the silence speak louder than celebration. The next day the winds blew wrong, not chaotic, just misaligned. The birds sang with no pattern, the leaves turned before their season, and the servants whispered, "He has changed. He walks like a shadow of himself. He does not speak to the jinn." Solomon waited. He wore the false ring, but he did not speak with it. He made no commands. He bound nothing. He released nothing. He fasted again. And beneath the throne the chains held, barely. For the spirits below could feel what the metal on his hand did not carry. The true seal was still missing, and the mouth of fire was beginning to open. One night in the courtyard a child screamed, not in pain, in vision. She had seen something in her sleep, a tower made of mirrors, a voice calling from beneath it, a ring floating on the water. Solomon heard her. He bent low, held her hand. "What did the voice say?" he asked. And the child, barely awake, whispered, "Return the silence." Solomon closed his eyes, and in the unseen world the seal pulsed from where it lay at the bottom of the river, hidden in reeds, guarded by no one but surrounded by the prayers he had whispered for 40 nights. It was not lost, it was waiting, for him to choose it again, not for power but for remembrance. He removed the false ring, quietly, wrapped it in cloth, buried it beneath the fig tree where he once wept as a child. And he walked barefoot into the night, toward the river, toward the place where silence first began to breathe, and beneath the throne the chains calmed. Zamahel closed his eyes, Armaris sighed in defeat, for even the mouth of fire knows when a soul has chosen obedience over command, and the seal waited. Before there was a throne, before there were chains, before the winds carried words, there was water, still, silent, witness. The river that curved behind Jerusalem had no name in those days. It was not mighty. It did not roar. It did not flood the plains or feed armies. It simply existed, and that was enough. For prophets do not seek rivers that sing. They seek rivers that listen. Solomon stood at the edge now, barefoot once more, as if trying to remember the boy he used to be, the one who first heard God in the breath between leaves. The night sky was soft above him, a blanket without weight. The stars were distant but alert, as if the heavens themselves leaned in to watch. He stepped into the water. The surface broke not with protest but with welcome. The river recognized him, not as king, not as a prophet, as one who had never forgotten how to bow. Each step deeper pulled more memory from the banks. The reeds shivered. The stones beneath his feet warmed. And then he stopped, the current around his knees still. Time folded inward, and he saw it. Not hidden, not guarded, the seal, resting against a curved stone coated in moss, kissed by the passing current as if the river itself had been praying over it. Solomon did not reach immediately. He knelt, water up to his chest, heart open, mouth silent. He closed his eyes, and the voice that had not spoken in many nights rose within him, not from above but from the place beneath his ribs where obedience becomes light. "You lost nothing," it said. He bowed his head deeper into the water. "You were never tested to fail," it whispered. "You were tested to remember." And Solomon wept, not because he was ashamed, but because he remembered the day the seal first touched his hand, how light had wrapped around him, not as fire but as surrender. He had asked only for wisdom, and God had given him everything that wisdom must carry: power, silence, burden, patience. And now return. He reached down. The water did not resist. The ring rose into his palm like a child returning to its mother. The moment it touched his skin, the river changed, not with thunder, not with light, with breath. Every leaf on the bank lifted. The air turned soft and full. The stars brightened just slightly. The seal was home, and beneath the throne every chain glowed, every demon bowed, not in fear, in recognition. The silence had returned. The mouth of fire had closed, and the one who wore the seal walked not in pride but in memory. Solomon stepped out of the river, dripping not just water but restoration. He wrapped the seal in a linen cloth, kissed it once, and placed it beneath his robe. He did not raise his arms. He did not summon winds. He simply whispered, "Thank you." And the night held it like a secret only God should hear. The next morning came gently, as if even the sun had bowed its head in reverence to what had returned. The city stirred, but only slightly. The doves circled lower. The figs seemed sweeter on the branch. Even the dust did not rise when the feet of servants passed. Something had shifted. They did not know what, only that the prophet was smiling again, not outwardly, not with his mouth, with stillness. Stillness has its own language, and Solomon spoke it fluently. He walked barefoot again through the halls. No crown, no guards, the seal hidden beneath his robe, resting once more against the place where his heartbeat waited. He made no proclamation. He summoned no one. He only returned to the throne. It was not empty, it was expectant, as if it too had been holding its breath. When Solomon entered, the birds fell silent in the rafters. The wind paused behind the lattices. Even the flame in the lamp by the door seemed to lean inward. He stood before it. The throne carved by Jinn, forged beneath stars that no longer shine, enameled in quiet promises and half-forgotten songs. He touched the armrest. It was cold, but when he sat, the temperature changed. The seal had returned to the seat, not just the ring, the presence. He did not lift his hand. He did not recite a name. He simply exhaled. And beneath the stone floor in the chamber of the bound, every chain grew still. Even Armaris, who had nearly broken free, folded into himself. For there was something in that breath that they recognized. Not authority, truth. Truth does not bind like iron, it binds like light. It enters the cracks pride cannot reach and sings softly where chains once clattered. The servants who stood by the chamber doors felt it, though they could not explain. They whispered to each other, "He has returned." But Solomon had never left. He had only remembered how to wear the silence again. Later that day, the Queen of Sheba returned. She had wandered the gardens alone since her last audience, not to avoid him, but to listen, to herself, to the wind, to the stones that still remembered other queens less careful than she. When she entered the throne room again, she paused at the threshold. Solomon did not stand. He did not need to, she could feel it. Whatever had been missing was back. The silence no longer weighed. It was welcome. She approached with her head high, not in pride, in peace. He gestured to the seat before him, and she sat. No words passed between them for many breaths. Then she said, "You found it." He looked at her, soft, unblinking. "It found me." She nodded. Of course it had. Then she asked the question that no one else could have asked, because only she had seen the fire in his absence. "How did you know it was truly yours?" He placed his palm over his chest. "Because when I wore the lie, this would not be." She looked down, touched her own chest. "So the truth is not in the seal," she said, "but in the silence it protects." He smiled, and the chamber filled with something even the angels paused to watch, understanding. She stood again. Her visit was nearing its end, but before she turned, she spoke once more. "You do not rule by the seal, you rule by remembering who gave it." He bowed his head, and when she stepped beyond the threshold, the wind returned. Not loudly, not fast, but like an old friend finding its place again. And beneath the throne, the stone that knew his name finally rested. That night Solomon returned to the river, not for ritual, not for longing, for gratitude. He wore no robe, only the skin God had given him. The stars above were bright and unafraid. The reeds whispered softly as though even they had missed him. The river, once still, moved gently now, as if exhaling after a long watch. He stepped into the water again. But this time not to retrieve, to return, not the seal, the memory. He stood waist-deep, arms open, face turned upward, and he spoke not to men, not to jinn, not even aloud, but the river heard him. "Let no seal ever own me," he whispered. "Let no command ever become mine." And the river answered, not in words, but in motion. A soft current curled around his waist, then circled his back like an embrace from a mother who had never been seen. He closed his eyes and saw the night when he first felt the presence of the unseen, when the birds had begun to speak, not because he controlled them, but because he had listened long enough to be trusted. The seal was still on his hand, but it pulsed not with power, with remembrance. He dipped it into the water. The current did not resist, and for a brief moment the river glowed, not with light, with clarity. The waters that knew his name had waited to be called again, not by force, but by faith. He stepped out slowly. Not a ripple broke out of place. The earth accepted him again, not as king, not as a prophet, as one who remembered the silence. In the days that followed, the court returned to its rhythms. Judgments were issued. Land was cultivated. Birdsong echoed through the chambers. The jinn worked again, not in fear, but in quiet order. Even Armaris fell into stillness, for the false ring had been buried, and the true seal no longer commanded, it was blessed. Solomon would wear it for the rest of his life, but he would never speak of it again, because some things once remembered must be guarded by silence. Years later, when a child would ask his father, "Where does wisdom live?" the father would point to the river and say, "Where he once walked." And beneath the water, stones still glowed faintly in the moonlight, not because they held power, but because they once held a prayer. And the water remembers. Long before Solomon walked the halls of his palace, Long before the jinn were bound beneath his throne, there were vaults, hidden chambers carved not by man nor jinn, but by something in between. Creatures of command, neither fallen nor faithful, neither seen nor entirely invisible. The old tongues called them the Murakibin, the Watchers, not the ones who fell, not those whose story became dust and chain. These were older still. They did not speak. They listened. They did not rebel. They remembered. And once, only once, they carved open the earth to bury what even heaven feared to keep. The vaults. No scroll recorded them. No prophet claimed their knowledge. But the earth knew. And the earth wept quietly over them, layer by layer, until they were mistaken for mountain, for ruin, for myth, until Solomon, one night not long after the seal had returned, he dreamed of fire, but not fire that devoured, fire that whispered. It did not rage, it circled. It danced along the stone beneath his throne, tracing patterns no human hand could write. When he awoke, his skin was warm. The soles of his feet tingled. He stood. I walked to the eastern wall of the palace. And there, in the space between shadow and stone, a crack, thin, silent, but breathing. The servants saw him descend the steps alone. They did not follow. Something in their bones told them, this is not for us. He walked for what felt like days, though the sun never moved. The deeper he moved beneath the city, the warmer the air grew, not from lack of light, but presence. Something ancient stirred. And then a door, not of wood, not of gold, but of black stone, as if carved from a night so dark even memory feared to touch it. There were no handles, no hinges, only a single symbol etched in perfect silence. The seal, not his, the first one, the one given to the angels before the world knew disobedience. He reached toward it, not to open, to feel. The stone throbbed under his palm. It did not ask him to enter. It waited. And he understood this door could not be opened by strength or lineage. Command, only by surrender. He fell to his knees, forehead to stone, breath steady, and he whispered, if what is within still remembers you, let it be bound again by your name. Nothing moved. Then a breath, not his, not wind, a breath from the other side, and the door began to open, not outward, not inward, downward, like the lid of a grave being lowered. The light that rose was not light, it was memory made visible. Golden dust, cold fire, symbols that shifted when looked at too long. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him without sound. What he saw he would never speak aloud. What he carried back was silence. And beneath the throne the chains tightened, for the demons felt it. The vault had opened, and even they, the ones who had taught men how to summon flame, how to charm shadow, even trembled. For what lay within the vault was not evil. It was a memory untouched by mercy. The vault did not smell of dust. It smelled of rain that never fell, of parchment burned before it could be read, of breath held for thousands of years. The air itself shimmered, not with heat but with tension, like the moment before a name is spoken that should never be known. Solomon stood still. His seal did not glow. His heart did. Each beat echoed against the vault's curved walls, waking sigils carved so deep they wept golden ash. The floor beneath him was not stone, it was glass. Clear but not empty beneath it, layer upon layer of forgotten script. Letters that shifted when seen, meanings that dissolved the moment they were grasped. The Watchers had carved them, not with tools but with regret. This was where they buried their disobedience. Not their fall, but their hesitation. For before some of them descended to tempt, they built this place to hide what could not be destroyed. And what was hidden was the first name, not the name of God, but the first word ever whispered in defiance. The word that cracked the obedience of creation, not with fire but with will. The word was not spoken here. It was etched, encoded, buried in layers so deep, even the jinn who tasted the edge of it forgot how to speak. But the vault remembered. And now it remembered Solomon. He walked slowly through the chamber. The walls shimmered with inscriptions written in the language of those who did not have tongues. Every few steps he paused, reading what could not be read with eyes but only with submission. One inscription pulsed as he neared. What was sealed by silence shall not be broken by sound. Another wept as he passed. He who seeks the name for power shall be erased by it. But the third, the one beneath his feet, glowed faintly in the rhythm of his own breath. To carry it is to suffer it is to see. He knelt, placed his hand upon the glass, and below something stirred. A light soft as the final breath of a dying star began to coil like smoke. It did not rise, it reached. It touched his hand, and in that moment he saw, not with vision, with surrender. He saw the watchers building the vault with tears in their eyes, each chisel a confession, each stone a wound. He saw the angels turn their backs, not in rage but in reverence. They could not seal what was placed here, because they knew only a prophet who understood command as a burden could ever look upon what was buried in this vault and still walk away whole. Solomon removed the seal from his finger, held it in his open palm. "I do not come to unbind," he whispered. The vault sighed. "I remember." The smoke coiled tighter, touched the edge of the ring, and faded. The glass dimmed. The inscriptions went silent. And the chamber darkened, not with shadow but with rest. He rose, not heavier, not lighter, just clearer. For he now knew what the angels had once held and why they had wept. It was not because they feared men would learn the word. It was because they knew some would try to speak it before they were ready to be silent. He stepped toward the door, and it opened for him. Outside, the tunnels seemed brighter, not with light, with space. The city was still asleep. The stars above had shifted slightly, as if making room for the weight he now carried. When he emerged, a dove landed on his shoulder, and beneath the throne Zamahel lifted his head. He knew where the prophet had been, and he too bowed, for Solomon had not opened the vault to command it. He had entered to remember and chosen to leave it closed. When Solomon returned to the palace, no herald announced him, no trumpet cried. No servant dared ask where he had been, but every step he took was felt. The floor beneath him did not groan under his weight. It bowed, not out of fear but recognition. The prophet walked like a man who had seen the root of fire and chosen not to feed it. He returned to the throne chamber in silence, and the jinn knew he had crossed a line they could never approach, a line even angels had once refused to draw. He sat. The seal still rested on his finger, but it pulsed differently now, not like a weapon, like a wound that had been seen, held, and forgiven. He sat not to judge, not to reign, to remember, and in that remembering the entire palace shifted. The air grew softer, the shadows calmed, even the demons in the deep, Armaris, Zamahel, and the others, curled into stillness. Because when a man walks out of a vault that angels feared to seal, he returns not with answers but with presence. Solomon closed his eyes, and in that stillness a vision came. Not a dream, not a prophecy, a memory that did not belong to him. He saw a plain, empty, and endless. And in the middle a single figure, neither jinn nor man. Its mouth was open but no sound emerged. Its hands were lifted, but no prayers fell from its lips. It was the first one, the one who spoke the word before the word had permission to exist, the one whose defiance had no witness, only consequence. Solomon saw him not as a monster, but as a question that had never been answered. And in that vision, the figure turned just slightly toward him. No accusation, no anger, only longing. And Solomon understood. Even the first to fall had not been erased, only hidden, buried in layers of silence so deep only a prophet who had been broken by mercy could look upon him and not shatter. He opened his eyes. The vision faded, but its weight did not. That night he wrote no scrolls, he issued no laws. He walked into the courtyard where the sky was clear and the wind smelled of fig leaves. He looked up and said softly, "Let the vault remain sealed. Let the word remain unnamed, but let the memory walk with me." The stars did not reply, I did not need to, they had heard him. And the earth, the vault, the throne, the spirits below, they all exhaled. Solomon never returned to the vault, not because he was forbidden, because he was trusted. And sometimes the greatest sign of trust is being allowed to walk away. The watchers who carved the chamber did not rejoice. They did not mourn, they rested. For what they had buried in shame had been seen by one who could carry it without corruption. And beneath the palace, where the stones still whispered ancient names, A silence deeper than fire settled. Not emptiness, not fear, peace. The kind of peace that only comes when something too sacred to speak has been remembered and gently left unspoken. It began with a mirror that did not reflect. A gift sent from the edge of the eastern mountains, carried by messengers with no names, wrapped in veils of moon thread, sealed in silence. They called it a gift for the throne. But Solomon sensed it before it was unwrapped. This was not a gift. This was a door. When the final veil was lifted, what remained was not made of glass nor polished metal. It shimmered like a frozen lake caught between sunrise and shadow, fluid but still. At first glance it showed nothing. Not even the room it sat in, not Solomon's face, not the torches, not the stone behind it. It showed only depth, unmeasured, unending. The courtiers avoided it. Even the jinn stepped back. They had seen many mirrors in the realms of men and spirits, but never one that refused to echo light. The prophet stood before it alone. He did not look into it, not yet. He knelt, not in fear, in respect, because some mirrors do not show what is seen. They reveal what has been buried. He touched its edge. It did not pulse. It did not resist. It breathed. And the breath was human, but faint, as though buried under 1,000 layers of forgetting. The seal on his hand warmed. And he knew this mirror did not come from the mountains. It came from the vault, not the one beneath the throne. The vault that lives inside every prophet, where visions are kept sealed until the soul is strong enough to bear them. The mirror was not from the outside. It was summoned by something awakening within. And within it a spirit waited. Not a jinn, not an angel, not a demon. Something older than names. Something that had once been light but had refused a command, not from arrogance but from grief. Solomon stood now. He faced the mirror, and he whispered, "Who are you?" The surface rippled, not like water, like memories. And from within the depths a figure began to form slowly, as though remembering itself piece by piece. The eyes appeared first, not angry, not pleading, tired, so deeply tired. The figure did not speak with a voice. It echoed with thought. I was there. When the first sorrow fell from heaven, Solomon did not move. The seal on his hand grew cold. The mirror pulsed again. I was not cast out, the figure continued. I walked away. Solomon breathed in. The chamber dimmed. The torches bent inward. He replied, "Why?" The mirror wept, not with tears, with color. Faint streaks of silver and violet cascaded down its surface like forgotten starlight. And the spirit answered, "Because I could not bear to see what would become of man, if we loved them but could not save them." And Solomon understood. This was not rebellion. This was sorrow unspoken for eternity. He whispered, "You were not named in the fall." The spirit nodded. "I was not praised for obedience, nor punished for defiance. I was forgot." And then the mirror cracked, not with force, with release. A single fracture, like a sigh held too long, and Solomon stepped closer. "You are the spirit buried in the mirror," he said, "the one who carried the ache of both heaven and earth." The chamber held its breath. The spirit asked, "Will you remember me?" And Solomon, prophet of the seal, answered not with words but with stillness. He reached out, and for the first time the mirror reflected something, not his face, not the room, but a single tear falling from eyes that had seen too much and still chose to forgive. The spirit bowed its head, not in shame, in relief, and the mirror dimmed, not broken, at peace, for the forgotten sorrow had been seen. And sometimes that is all a spirit needs to be whole again. The mirror no longer shimmered. It pulsed softly, as if the memory within it had been allowed to sleep again, not because it was forgotten, but because it was finally seen. Solomon sat before it, not as a king, not as a prophet, as a man. He placed the seal upon the floor between them, not to bind, but to witness. He asked nothing, offered no command, and still the spirit in the mirror spoke. Its voice was not sound, it was warm. I was the ache beneath the angels' obedience, the silence that stood beside their praise, the watcher who wept when none were allowed to. Solomon lowered his head. Even his breath slowed, not out of ear but awe. "Why now?" he asked. The mirror flickered like a candle in windless dark. "Because your heart has held the vault without opening it. because you did not let the seal speak louder than your silence, because you remembered pain without trying to fix it. Outside the chamber, time moved forward, but within this space, time folded gently around them like the closing of wings. Solomon thought of the jinn, the chained ones beneath his feet, and those who still walked freely across the world. He thought of the vaults, the shadows, the seals, and now this spirit neither cursed nor crowned. "You stood in the place between," Solomon whispered. "Yes," the spirit replied, "and there is no praise in that place, only echo." Solomon asked the question that even the angels had turned from. "Do you regret your silence?" The mirror dimmed, not in shame, in truth. "No, but I have longed for someone to understand that it was not silence from rebellion, but from reverence too deep for sound." Solomon wept, not with sobs, with breath that shook in his chest like the wind remembering its first name. And the mirror responded not with light but with memory. A vision unfurled across its surface. A mountain empty, a wind carrying names not yet spoken, a figure cloaked in stillness, watching as the angels descended to test men with flame and word. But this watcher, did not descend. It remained behind, watching, aching. And when the others fell or obeyed, it buried itself in the mirror it had shaped from its own sorrow, choosing to be forgotten rather than to become part of a story that had no place for hesitation. Solomon looked into that sorrow and whispered the only words that could matter. "You were not wrong." And the mirror cracked again, not in anger, in release. The spirit's shape began to fade, not in erasure but in peace. It no longer needed to be seen. It had been witnessed. Before it vanished, one final thought passed into Solomon's heart. Tell the earth that not all silence is guilt. Some of it is love too deep for voice. The mirror dimmed. Its surface returned to stillness. But this time when Solomon looked, he saw not his reflection but the faint outline of a figure kneeling beside him. Not a ghost, not a watcher, a sorrow made holy. He touched the glass once more, bowed his head, and rose. He did not carry the mirror away. He left it in the chamber where no one would speak of it but the stones would remember. And as he walked out, the seal on his hand pulsed once, soft and warm. Not because something had been conquered, but because something had been healed. The chamber door closed behind him. No guard stood there. No scribes followed. Not a single step echoed through the corridor. Because what had just happened was not for history. It was for the breath. The breath that trembles in a prophet's chest when the weight of mercy grows too heavy to carry alone. Solomon returned to his upper chambers. He did not summon the jinn. He did not speak to the birds. He did not ask the wind what it had heard. He sat in silence, and the silence sat with him. Across the courtyard, the Queen of Sheba had not yet left. She had remained within the gardens, beneath the shade of a fig tree whose roots had begun to wrap around an old stone. She could not say why she had delayed her return, only that her heart had been whispering, "There is something still unfinished." That afternoon she felt it, not in her mind, in her bones. A wave of stillness rising from the heart of the palace, not like a cry but like a prayer that had no need for words anymore. She stood. Her guards tried to follow. She raised her hand and they stopped. She walked alone through the corridors that now seemed warmer, quieter, as if the stones themselves had just been forgiven. At the threshold of the throne room she paused. Solomon sat upon the throne, but he did not look like a king. He looked like the end of a long question. She stepped forward, he looked up, and they both knew no greeting was needed. She sat beside the steps of the throne, not at his feet, not before his gaze, but within his silence. He turned to her and said softly, "There was a spirit buried in a mirror, not bound, not wicked, just waiting to be seen." She said nothing at first, then whispered, "And was it set free?" Solomon shook his head, a faint smile behind his eyes. "No. It didn't need freedom. It needed someone to say, 'You were not wrong for feeling too deeply.'" She looked down at her hands, and for the first time since her arrival, a single tear fell, not for herself. For all the queens, all the prophets, all the watchers, all the forgotten in-between souls who had held too much and spoken too little. She looked up at him. "And what do we do with sorrow like that?" He answered without hesitation. We carry it gently, and we do not try to explain it. In that moment, the light from the high windows fell between them like a thread, soft, golden, unbreakable. She nodded, not in agreement, in surrender to the mystery, to the silence, to the ache beneath the crown. Solomon leaned back. The seal on his hand did not glow, it rested. The mirror would remain in the chamber, not guarded, not hidden, just still. And those who would come after would find it only if they too had first tasted sorrow and chosen not to weaponize it. That night Solomon wrote no psalms. He gave no judgments. He walked beneath the stars barefoot, a dove following quietly behind him. And when he looked to the sky, he whispered, "Some spirits are not meant to be cast out, only embraced, then let go." Above him the stars did not shimmer, they bowed. And beneath the throne the oldest chains grew warm, not in warning, in remembrance, that even among demons some were once watchers, and among watchers some only ever wanted to see. They say there are cities so old, so hidden, that even the jinn have forgotten their names. Cities not made of brick or bone, but of breath, exhaled once by the earth itself in a moment of sorrow so deep it became architecture. Solomon first heard of it in a whisper carried by a stone. Not a man, not a bird, a stone. He had placed his hand upon the wall of the southern court during one of his hours of stillness and felt a tremble not in the rock, but in the memory sealed inside it. And it spoke, not in language, in ache. The kind of ache only old stone carries, the kind carved not by tools but by the footsteps of a people who had once been close to the mercy of God and then disappeared. That night Solomon did not sleep. He sat with the seal pressed to his chest, waiting, not for vision, not for dreams, for instruction. At the third breath before dawn, the ground beneath his chamber pulsed. Once, soft, low, like the first heartbeat of something buried. He rose. He summoned no court. He took no staff, only the ring and his silence. By the time the sun touched the hills, he had already walked beyond the city walls, his sandals soaked in the dew of a valley no map had ever drawn. The birds did not follow. The jinn did not speak. Even the wind, loyal as it was, held back. For this journey was not through sky or scripture. It was through memory of the earth. By midday he reached the place. To the eye it was a field, dry, cracked, forgotten. But to the seal on his hand it was not soil. It was breathtaking, held too long, waiting to be exhaled. He knelt, pressed his palm to the ground, and whispered, "If you remember, I am listening." The silence after was not empty, it was holy. Then the ground sighed, a long trembling sigh, and the field cracked in a perfect circle, revealing beneath it a spiral staircase of stone so smooth, so impossibly cold that even the air felt shy to touch it. Solomon descended. Step by step, each one carrying a name the earth had tried to forget but could no longer hide. As he reached the bottom, light returned, not from above, from the walls. They glowed with inscriptions not etched but breathed into the stone by the voices of a people who had worshipped not idols but the silence before God spoke. This was no ruined city. This was a prayer made of architecture, and it still lived. At the center, a courtyard, no throne, no altar, only a pool still and clear surrounded by 7 pillars, each one hollow, not for weakness, for echo. Solomon stepped forward, knelt beside the pool, saw his reflection but not his face. He saw every chain he had placed, every demon he had named, every silence he had broken. And behind all of it, a woman, not Sheba, not his mother. A face he did not know but recognized, the last prophet of the city, the one who had buried it beneath the valley when the world grew too loud for truth to survive above ground. Her mouth did not move, but her eyes asked, "Will you let us be forgotten?" And Solomon whispered, "No." The pool shimmered, the walls brightened. The earth beneath the city shifted, not in collapse but in gratitude. He had come, not to rule, not to reveal, to remember. And in doing so, he awoke a city made of breath. Solomon remained by the pool for some time. He did not speak again. The city did not ask. It simply pulsed, stone that breathed, pillars that remembered their names, a silence that did not seek to be broken because it was already whole. This was not a city forgotten by accident. It had been buried by choice. The prophet could feel it now, in the stone beneath his knees, in the soft glow that never flickered, in the air that carried no dust. These people had not vanished. They had folded themselves into the breath of the earth to protect something too holy for the world above. A word, a vow, a prayer never spoken aloud. The seventh pillar flickered. Its hollow chamber began to hum, softly, as if waking from a fast so deep its hunger was not for food but for remembrance. Solomon walked toward it. As he approached, he heard some thing, not language, not voice, a rhythm, a woman's breath, slow and steady like someone asleep beneath centuries of stone. And then a whisper, not from within, from behind him. He turned. A figure stood in the center of the courtyard, cloaked in white, no face visible, but the presence felt like peace braided into sorrow. He did not ask who she was. He already knew. The last prophet of the buried city. The one whose breath still pulsed through the chambers like the heartbeat of a vow never broken. She spoke with thought. You are not the first to find this place. He lowered his head. But you are the first to arrive without wanting to unearth it. He looked up. Her veil shimmered in the light of the pillars, as if woven from the dust of forgotten psalms. She stepped forward, and he noticed her feet did not disturb the floor. She walked as one already beneath it, not dead, but folded into the memory of earth itself. She asked, "Why did you come?" He did not answer with title, lineage, or purpose. He said only, "I felt the breath of a sorrow that hadn't been exhaled." She paused, and then for the first time in 5,000 years she smiled. "You hear what most call silence." He stepped closer. "What did your people bury?" She turned, lifted her hand. And the seventh pillar opened, not with cracking or dust, but with reverence. Within it, a single stone tablet. No fire surrounded it. No glow adorned it. It was plain, but Solomon's seal pulsed the moment he saw it. The prophetess walked to the tablet and gently placed her hand upon it. "What is written here," she said, "is not law, it is a lament." He moved closer. "The lament of what?" he asked. She answered, "The day we saw the world would choose power over prayer." Solomon's throat tightened. He had seen it too. Kings who wore the ring without reverence. Sorcerers who spoke the names without fear. Men who used silence only as a mask for ambition. She continued, "We buried this lament because we knew it would be twisted into prophecy, sold to rulers, weaponized by those who did not weep when they spoke the name of God." He looked at the tablet. There were no letters on it, only ridges like the lines of a fingertip. A memory too sacred for language. He placed his hand upon it and wept. The weeping was not loud, it did not shake him, it flowed from his eyes, from the stone, from the chamber walls, and the city sighed. The wind returned, a real breeze, soft and sweet, rising from below like incense. And the prophetess said, "You may not take it, you may not record it, but you may carry it in your stillness." He bowed, "I will." And as he rose, he knew, this city would never be unearthed. Its stones would never be pillaged. Its story would never be traded for scrolls or seals. It would remain beneath the breath of the earth, where sorrow once became silence, and silence once became sanctuary. Solomon stepped back from the seventh pillar. He had touched no relic, taken no scroll, spoken no command. But something followed him now, not a shadow, not a spirit, not even the woman cloaked in white. It was the ache of an ancient promise still whispering through the earth. He turned once more to the prophetess. Her veil had begun to fade, thread by thread, into the light of the pillar. She was not dying. She was returning, becoming again what she had chosen to be, a breath that would keep the city sealed. He raised his hand in farewell. She did not wave. She only nodded as if to say, "Carry it gently." He began the ascent, each step marked not by echo but by remembrance. When he reached the surface, the field had not changed. The crack through which he descended was gone, closed as if it had never opened. Only a soft circle of dust remained, slightly warmer than the surrounding soil, as though the earth itself had exhaled while he was below. Solomon stood for a while, letting the wind greet him again. It was quiet, and I was grateful. And the seal on his hand pulsed once, not as a warning, not as a command, as a heartbeat, softer than before, wiser. He turned toward Jerusalem. The walk back took longer, not in distance, in weight. He now carried a city inside him, not in his mind, but in the pauses between his words, in the way he blinked longer before speaking, in the way he listened when someone said nothing. The city had changed him. And when he arrived, the guards did not ask where he had gone. They only lowered their eyes. The Queen of Sheba met him beneath the fig tree. She had been watching the horizon for days, knowing somehow he would return differently. And he did. He looked at her. She stepped forward, looked into his eyes. "You saw something," she said. He nodded. "I remembered something the world was never meant to forget." She waited, and he continued, "That silence is not absence, it is a temple." She closed her eyes, and for the first time felt the ground beneath them hum, not with magic but with memory. That night, Solomon spoke no parables. He issued no judgments. He sat beside the wall of the palace beneath the stars and breathed, and the city beneath the earth breathed with him. It had not been awakened. It had been witnessed. And sometimes that is all a buried world needs to keep on living silently, deep beneath the steps of the impatient, waiting only for those who know how to listen. It began with a shadow that never moved. At the edge of the eastern desert, where the sand sleeps beneath the weight of forgotten suns, there stood a tower. No one built it. No one remembered when it first appeared. And yet it stood tall, narrow, seamless, with no door, no inscription, no decay. The jinn called it Uashiel, the witness, because it did not speak. I only watched it. And when the wind shifted strangely or the stars blinked in patterns that startled the wise, the tower remained still, as if untouched by time, as if waiting. Solomon heard of it from a sparrow. It landed on his windowsill 3 mornings in a row, carrying no message, only silence. On the 4th morning he followed it. He did not take soldiers. He did not ride. He walked alone beneath a sky too quiet to ignore. For 2 days he passed no settlement, no tree, no sound, only dust that curled like lost prayers around his ankles and sun that never blinked. On the 3rd day he saw it, not rising, not glowing, just standing. The tower cast a shadow that never moved, not with the sun, not with the stars, as if it obeyed no light. It was taller than any structure man had ever built. Yet its presence did not boast, it simply existed, like a thought too old for words, like a memory too heavy for language. He stepped closer. The wind died. His feet touched the base, smooth as still water, cold as unspoken truth. He placed his hand upon it, and the seal on his ring did nothing. It neither pulsed nor warmed. It did not glow, it only waited. He whispered, "What are you?" And for the first time in Solomon's life, the seal turned cold, not in fear, in reverence, as if the tower was not made to answer questions but to keep one from being asked. A single line appeared on its surface, not carved, revealed. "We were told not to fall." Solomon stepped back. He looked up, but the top was lost in the sky. A second line appeared. "Even after the command, we remained." He knelt. For this was not a tower, it was a remnant of something that should have fallen when the first rebellion cracked the heavens but didn't. Something that chose to remain upright, not out of pride but because it still believed. And the seal trembled. The jinn who wandered the outskirts of the desert turned their faces to the dust. Even the winds bent away, because they knew this was not a tower, this was a vow. A structure made from the breath of obedience that refused to break even as the world fell around it. Solomon bowed. He did not ask to enter. He did not try to climb. He simply pressed his forehead to the stone and whispered, "I see you." And the tower, for the first time in thousands of years, responded, not with words, with a single pulse from deep within, a sound like the heartbeat of a mountain remembering its first prayer. Solomon stood, and on the surface of the tower one final line appeared. "As long as one remembers, we do not fall." Solomon did not move for a long time. The desert stretched endlessly around him, a sea of silence, and he, a single ripple in its sand. But the tower did not fade. Its presence grew deeper, though it cast no shadow that shifted. The seal on his hand had warmed once more, but gently now, like a child pressing its face against the palm of its mother. He walked around the base of the tower slowly, reverently, tracing its curve with his fingertips. No doors, no windows, only the smooth surface of time unbroken. But on the far side, a single mark, barely visible as though written in starlight long forgot. He knelt to see it. It was not a word. It was not a symbol. It was a fingerprint pressed deep into the surface, as if something had once leaned here, forehead and hand against the stone, weeping. The wind stirred, and Solomon felt it not on his skin but in the back of his throat. A taste of something old, bittersweet, like a story that had never been allowed to end. He placed his own hand upon the mark, closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids the tower began to speak, not aloud but in image. He saw a plane thousands of years before his time. A host of beings, not angels, not men, gathered beneath a sky so heavy with silence that it bent the horizon. They were waiting for something. And when it came, a command, a call, a sound too holy to be described, some obeyed. Some hesitated, some fell. But one among them remained, not out of pride, not out of fear, out of love. A love so deep, so unwilling to betray either light or longing that it refused to choose sides. And that one became the tower. Not a metaphor, not a symbol. That one became this structure, folded their being into stone, bound themselves into the earth, not to escape judgment, to keep watch, to wait for what? Solomon opened his eyes and knew the answer. To wait for someone who could see sorrow without breaking it, who could stand before fallen things and not flinch. The wind returned, but not as it had before. This wind circled the tower, soft and warm, singing. It sang in no language, only vibration. Only hush, and the tower glowed faintly, not bright, just enough to say, "You have been heard." Solomon stepped back. He pressed his forehead to the stone once more. "You are not forgotten," he whispered, and behind his words something in the sky shifted. A single cloud moved across the sun. The shadow it cast touched the base of the tower, and for the first time in history its shadow moved, just slightly, just enough, as if the vow had loosened, not broken, not ended, acknowledged. And the tower pulsed once more, not with warning, with peace, because something it had waited for, an eye willing to weep, a heart willing to kneel, had finally come. And so it whispered its last truth into the silence of the desert. The ones who do not fall are not above sorrow, they are born from it. Solomon turned from the tower just as the wind began to rise. It didn't push him. It guided me, not to hurry his return, but to protect the path behind him. For the desert was sacred now, no longer a wilderness, but a veil. And behind that veil the tower would remain, not because it was hidden, because it had been seen. He walked slowly, the seal on his hand quiet, his heart heavy in the most sacred way. Like a scroll placed upon a prophet's chest, not to be read, but to be carried with fear, with awe, with love. As he crested the final hill before the city, the wind whispered through the olive trees. He paused, not to rest, to listen. Because silence, once honored, becomes a voice of its own. And it spoke to him now. A voice that was not his, not jinn, not an angel, not a woman, a vow. Do not let them forget what it means to remain. He closed his eyes and answered softly, "I won't." When he returned to Jerusalem, the gates did not open wide. The guards did not blow horns. They stepped aside, because something in the air around him told them to be still. That evening the court gathered, not for judgment, not for festivals. They came because something in their hearts felt drawn to silence. Solomon stood before them. He wore no crown, only dust from the desert on the hem of his robe. He spoke only once, and his voice was not loud. There is a vow beneath the sky, older than angels, stronger than fire, quieter than time. The scribes reached for their ink. He raised his hand. "Do not write it, just remember it." Then he walked away, leaving the silence behind him like a trail of forgotten light. That night he returned to his upper chambers, sat beside the fig tree, let the stars see him without armor, and he whispered into the dark, "I saw one who did not fall." The wind answered, "You have become one." And beneath the throne, deep in the chambers of chains, Zamahel trembled. Not in fear, in awe, because even the demons knew that Solomon had gone beyond the place where even angels turned their eyes. He had seen the tower that remained, and chosen not to destroy it, not to unbind it, just to love it with silence. And so the tower stood still once more, not because it was commanded, but because it had finally been heard. And far beyond the desert, in the place where breath becomes light, a single line was whispered into the pages of the unseen. He saw the one who remained, and did not flinch. There was a sound in the palace, not loud, not suddenly, just strange. It came at night, in the hour when even the wind had settled into sleep. The servants first heard it while tending the eastern wing, a gentle knocking, not of wood, not of stone, but of breath against breath, like someone standing just beyond the veil of silence, trying to be heard without knowing how. They told no one, only bowed to the air and walked backwards quietly. Solomon heard it on the third night. He had not been asleep. He rarely sleeps now. Instead, he sat in stillness with his hand resting near the seal, his soul listening more than his ears. That night the sound reached him, not through the walls but through the heart. A tremble, a plea, a presence, but not of jinn, not an angel, not even sorrow. This was something else, something waiting. He rose, no lamp, no sandals. Barefoot he moved through the marble corridors, his feet silent against the memory-laden floors. He followed the sound, not down, not beneath the palace, up, to a part of the palace few had entered, a room above the court, built not for power but for watching the stars. It was not a throne room. It was not a prayer hall. It was a place made of open arches, stone, benches, and still air. He entered and the sound stopped, not vanished, paused, as if the one making it had sensed that someone had finally arrived who might understand. In the center of the room, a cradle, small, empty, woven of fig branches and old linen. It hadn't been there the day before, yet it looked older than the palace. He approached, knelt, placed his hand on the side of the cradle and felt it. Warmth, not heat, not spirit, warmth. And then a breath, not from behind, not from within. From everywhere, the whole room inhaled once, and then exhaled in the voice of a child, but not with words, with longing. Solomon lowered his head to the cradle and heard the thought that had no shape. I was never taught to speak, but I have waited to be heard. He closed his eyes and whispered, I hear you. The air is still. The arches hummed softly like a song that had never needed lyrics. And the thought came again, they buried me before I was named, not out of cruelty, out of fear. Solomon asked gently, who are you? And the voice answered, the voice they were afraid would cry, the soul they silenced before it could sin. The prophet wept, for this was not a demon, not an angel, not even a watcher. It was an unborn name, a presence made of all the things the world had refused to let live because they might speak what no one was ready to hear. And now it was awake. Solomon knelt beside the cradle for a long time. The room held its breath with him. No torches flickered. No curtains swayed. Even the stars, visible through the open arches, seemed to pause mid-glow. The voice, if it could be called that, did not cry, did not wail. It pulsed, a presence made of memory too tender for language. He whispered again, why were you buried? And the answer came not as words, but as images etched into the stillness. He saw a village, long ago. A woman holding her belly, singing softly, not with joy, with apology. He saw elders gathered around her, their faces torn between fear and reverence. She carries something that remembers, one said. She dreams of things not yet written, said another. And then he saw them weaving prayers into silence, binding the womb not with blades but with forgetting, not to kill, to contain. And the soul within, gentle, voiceless, awake, was never born, but it did not fade. It remained, floating between realms, gathering the sorrows of all things never allowed to speak. The children silenced in the womb, the thoughts buried beneath obedience. The truths are too tender for prophets to proclaim. All of them became this voice. And now in Solomon's time it had found form again, not to scream, not to accuse, just to be held. He placed both hands on the cradle and closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered, and the air shimmered as if light itself had just taken a breath it had been holding for centuries. The voice returned. They feared I would destroy what they loved. He replied softly, no. You would have healed it in ways they didn't understand. The seal on his hand pulsed, Once, twice, but not in warning, in recognition. Even the ring felt the ache. The cradle warmed, and then it sighed, as if the soul within it, so long unnamed, so long forgotten, had finally found arms strong enough to carry it without trying to define it. And then Solomon asked, "Do you wish to be born?" The pause was long. Then came the reply, "No, I wish to be remembered." He bowed his head again and said, "You will be." Outside, the sky began to lighten, not because dawn had come, but because something that had been hidden was no longer alone. And all across the palace, the doves stirred in their nests, the fig trees rustled without wind, and the marble halls warmed, because a soul that had never been taught to speak was finally seen. Solomon remained beside the cradle until the sky had faded from black to the soft, bruised blue of morning. He didn't rise. He didn't move. He simply listened to the warmth beneath his palms, to the breath that never left a body, to the voice that was never taught to speak but still found a way to exist. The room had changed, not in shape, not in stone, but in presence. Something holy had entered, or perhaps had always been there, waiting for someone who would not try to name it, only hold it. When he finally stood, he did not look back at the cradle, not because he forgot, because he knew this was not something to carry with the eyes, only with the soul. And so he walked barefoot, robe whispering against stone, down the stairs and into the world once more. But he was not the same. The voice had stayed with him, not as sound, as a rhythm, a silence that pulsed like a heartbeat. As he passed through the palace corridors, servants paused, not to bow, not to speak, just to breathe near him, because something about the air around him felt like home. He reached the outer courts. Birds began to sing, but they sang differently, slower, softer, as though, even they were choosing to leave space between their notes. And in that space, the unspoken child danced. Solomon stood in the garden. He raised his hand. The seal glowed faintly, not with command, but compassion. He whispered, "To all that was never allowed to become, I see you." And all around him, the fig trees dropped one leaf each at the same moment, as if something in their roots had felt heard for the first time in generations. Later that day, when the court gathered for matters of state, Solomon did not enter through the usual door. He walked through the courtyard carrying a single empty linen cloth folded in his arms. The courtiers watched, confused. The scribes waited, pens ready. The jinn in attendance lowered their eyes. He stood before the throne, did not sit. He placed the cloth on the stone floor and said, "There is a voice in the world you cannot hear, but it listens when you lie. It watches when you look away. It weeps when you forget what you once longed to become before the world told you to be useful instead." The court was silent. He looked at them, every face, one by one, and continued, "This voice is not a threat, it is a memory of every soul that could not become because no one gave it permission to stay soft." Then he picked up the cloth, kissed it once, and walked away. He did not explain. He did not write. He let the silence speak. And that night, all across the palace, and all across the hearts of those who had heard him, something shifted. Mothers wept in prayer, not knowing why. Fathers who had never named their grief placed their hands over their hearts. And the children, asleep in their beds, dreamed of voices singing from cradles that had never been rocked. And in the high chamber where no one was watching, the cradle remained, empty, but not alone, because the soul that had never been born was no longer forgotten. Sometimes to remember a voice that never learned to speak is the holiest kind of listening this world will ever know. There is a place beneath every throne that no map will ever mark. Not because it cannot be drawn, but because it was never meant to be found with eyes. In the time of Solomon, it lay hidden beneath the very seat from which he judged nations, heard angels, commanded winds. But few knew what was truly beneath that sacred platform. Not just stone, not just the seal. Beneath the throne was another throne, older, quieter, forgotten by men, feared by jinn, and remembered only by those who still knew how to pray without words. It was not made of gold. It was made of memory. Some said it was carved from the stone of the first cave where the first man wept after heaven had closed its gates. Others whispered it was shaped from the bones of angels who chose silence over rebellion. But Solomon did not learn of it from books or scrolls or spells. He heard it breathing on a night when the stars refused to shine. He had been praying long after the others had gone, his forehead pressed to the marble, his heart aching with questions he no longer knew how to name, and then a sound, not a voice, not footsteps, just breathe, rising from beneath the throne, as if the earth itself was remembering something too holy to interrupt. He did not speak, he listened, and the breath became a presence, not jinn, not an angel, not shade, it was something else. It had watched every king before him, even the ones who never wore crowns. It had known the prophets before they became messengers. It had waited for Solomon long before his mother dreamed of his name. And when it spoke, it did not use words, it used gravity. He felt the weight of its knowing press upon his chest like the moment before thunder when even the mountains held their breath. And then he saw it, not with eyes, with soul. The throne beneath the throne, it looked like nothing. And it looked like everything. It was cracked and ancient and smaller than he thought, but it shimmered with the memory of every soul who had ever sat in silence when speaking would have betrayed truth. This was the throne that measured kings not by gold but by grief, and the voice, if it could be called that, asked only one question: will you sit here even if no one sees? Solomon did not answer with words. He simply knelt. And the throne beneath the throne welcomed him without fanfare, without crown, without need for anything but presence. And that night, beneath the seat of power the world praised, Solomon sat on a throne only the forgotten could see. The winds did not stir that night, nor did the stars return. Only the quiet deepened, as if heaven itself was leaning closer, listening not to words, but to the weight of a man kneeling where kings do not go. Solomon sat beneath his own throne, his hands resting on knees no longer adorned with rings, his breath slowed to the rhythm of the earth's old remembering. And then the presence began to shift, not away, deeper, as if it were peeling back layers of time, revealing that the foundation of the throne was not built by demons, nor by men, nor even by angels, but by silence. Not the absence of sound, but the fullness of stillness, the place where all voices go when they are no longer trying to be heard, only held. And in that stillness a door opened, not one he could see, one he felt just behind his ribs, as if an old part of him was stepping forward that had waited lifetimes to speak. He did not rise, he bowed lower. And in that posture the memory of the first whisper returned, not in sound, in story. The throne beneath the throne began to show him things. A woman weeping beside a river no one had named yet. A child burying a bird with a prayer he had not been taught. A jinn king laying down his blade and dissolving into mist because mercy had touched him in a dream. These were not visions. They were soul prints, the echoes of forgotten holiness, the unseen scaffolding upon which all true kingdoms are built. And then he saw himself, not as a king, not as a prophet, as a boy, small, frightened, curled beside a mother who hummed to him stories that no one else believed. He wept. For the first time in years he wept not out of grief but out of return, because beneath the throne, beneath the layers of rule and miracles and myth, he had found the boy who never stopped wondering why God sometimes hid behind silence. And in that moment the throne beneath the throne spoke again, this time not in breath, in memory. And this was the message: you will not be remembered for the kingdom you built, but for the parts of you that remained soft while holding its weight. You will not be judged by the demons you commanded, but by the prayers you whispered when no one was watching. And when your crown is dust and your name is just a sound in the wind, the earth will still remember how gently you sat on the throne no one could see. Solomon did not answer. He could not. His mouth was filled not with words but with awe. The kind of awe that bends even the strongest neck, that hollows out the chest to make room for sacredness. He remained there until dawn began to rise. And as the first light touched the upper stones, something beneath the throne vanished. Not the memory, not the truth, only the presence. It had done what it came to do, And Solomon was no longer the same. He stood, silently, slowly, and as he ascended the hidden stair back into the visible world. He did not carry the throne with him, but he carried what it had given, a knowing that even the most powerful men must sit in the dust to remember who they are beneath the voices, beneath the miracles, beneath the names. And far above, where the throne shimmered in gold, none could tell what had changed. But those who came near him afterward often paused, not out of fear, not out of honor, but because they felt something in the air around him, a softness too deep for words. A presence that had once been silence and now was love. The end came softly, not with the cry of angels, nor the roar of jinn, nor even the cracking of earth. It came like a breath exhaled slowly by the soul of the world, as if even death knew to kneel when entering Solomon's chamber. He stood once more upon the crystal floor, over the sea of glass that he had once believed unshatterable. And for the first time, he saw the hairline cracks spreading like veins through the throne's reflection. Not from age, not from failure, from completion. The throne, too, had fulfilled its task, and it was ready to rest. He did not summon the jinn, he did not gather the scribes, he did not write a final decree. He simply stepped out into the garden that remembered Eden. The sky held its breath. The trees leaned in. He walked among the olive branches barefoot. No ring, no crown, just the sun and the silence and the sound of his steps on sacred soil. The birds did not speak that day. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they were listening. And the earth itself, which had once carried his armies, now cradled his shadow like a child's forgotten lullaby. When he stopped walking, he was not alone. The same wind that had whispered through the garden of his father, that had passed over the ark of old, that had brushed the robe of Musa on the mountain of fire, that same wind now wrapped itself around him like a cloak made of remembrance. And in that wind he heard it again. You are not the builder of thrones, you are the keeper of silence. You are not the commander of demons, you are the one who never forgot to kneel. You are not the voice of power, you are the breath between the names of God. And then he bowed, not out of exhaustion, not out of ritual, out of return. His forehead touched the earth, and in that final prostration he released the world, all of it. The jinn cities, the golden halls, the names they called him, the fear, the honor, the weight. He let it fall like petals from a flower finally allowed to close. And when his soul rose, it did not ascend with fire nor with chariots of flame. It rose with stillness, the kind that wraps the sky just before dawn. When the people found his body, they thought he was still praying. For his staff stood firm beneath his hand, and his head was bowed, and the birds above his throne had not stopped singing. But when the termites beneath had eaten through the wood and his body fell softly to the floor, they understood. Even in death, Solomon had taught them that no throne stands forever. Only the silence beneath it does, and they wept, not with despair, but with reverence, because they had not lost a king. They had witnessed a return. The throne was buried, but beneath the stone where it once stood they carved no name, only this: he listened where others spoke. He remembered when others ruled. He bowed before he commanded. And they say that if you go to that place now, on a night when the wind is still and the stars are not afraid to shine, you can hear something faint in the soil beneath your feet. A whisper, a breath, the silence that once built kingdoms without laying a single brick. And it calls only to those who do not seek power but presence, who do not desire crowns but closeness, who do not rise to rule but kneel to remember. Close your eyes. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. And now, what if the last throne God gave to you wasn't made of gold but silence? Would you still kneel? Would you still serve? Or would you listen until the silence spoke your name? And if that throne beneath the throne never rises again, would you still bow in the silence? If the jinn never build for you again, would your heart still believe? And if God's last message to you was only quiet, would you still listen for his voice in the stillness? In this final hour of night, When every sound has fallen asleep and only your soul remains awake, a question echoes softly. If the deepest secret of destiny was hidden beneath the silence of the throne, would you still search for God there?